There was a man named Daniel Whitmore who lived his life in crisp, measured strokes, sharp suits, polished shoes, and a schedule so tightly wound that even his assistant trembled at the thought of disrupting it. He was a titan in the corporate world, a man who commanded boardrooms with a single glance, his voice a blade that cut through hesitation. Success was his oxygen, control his religion. And yet, beneath the immaculate veneer of his existence, there was a quiet, unspoken ache, a whisper of something he refused to name. It began, as so many things do, with a moment of weakness. Daniel had just closed a brutal deal, one that had left his rivals gutted and his own nerves frayed. He needed release, something to unwind the coiled tension in his muscles. A drink would have been the obvious choice, but instead, he found himself wandering past a small, unassuming boutique tucked between skyscrapers. The window display was soft pinks and flowing silks, delicate ballet flats and lace-trimmed leotards. He should have kept walking, but he didn't. The bell chimed as he stepped inside, his pulse quickening with a mix of shame and exhilaration. The shop smelled of lavender and vanilla, a stark contrast to the sterile cologne of his office. A saleswoman, older, with kind eyes, greeted him without judgment, as if men in $1,000 suits browsing ballet wear were an everyday occurrence. "Looking for something special?" she asked. He should have lied. He should have said it was for a niece, a sister, anyone but himself. Instead, his fingers brushed against a pale pink leotard, the fabric impossibly soft. "For me," he murmured, the words slipping out before he could stop them. She didn't laugh, didn't recoil, just nodded, as if she had been expecting him all along. That night, alone in his penthouse, Daniel stood before the mirror, trembling as he pulled on the leotard. The fabric clung to him, reshaping his body in ways that made his breath catch. He had expected to feel ridiculous. Instead, he felt beautiful. The next day, he returned to the boutique. Then again the day after that. Each visit chipped away at the armor he had spent decades forging. The saleswoman, Madame Laurent, as he came to know her, began offering suggestions. Tights, a tutu, satin point shoes, though she warned him they would take time to master. He bought them all, his corporate discipline now redirected toward this secret obsession. Then came the invitation. "You have the body of a dancer," Madame Laurent said one evening, watching him trace hesitant steps in front of the mirror. "But if you truly wish to learn, you need a teacher." He hesitated. This was madness. If anyone found out, his colleagues, his investors, his reputation would be ruined. But the thought of stopping now was unbearable. So he agreed. Madame Laurent introduced him to Clara, a retired prima ballerina with a no-nonsense demeanor and eyes that missed nothing. The first lesson was agony. His muscles screamed, his balance faltered, and more than once, he stumbled into the bar, his face burning with humiliation. But Clara didn't coddle him. She pushed, corrected, demanded more. And to his own astonishment, Daniel craved it. Weeks passed, then months. His body softened, his movements grew fluid. He started wearing tights beneath his suits, the gentle pressure a constant reminder of his secret self. His late-night practice sessions became the highlight of his days, the only time he felt truly alive. Then came the gala. Madame Laurent's studio was hosting a recital, small, private, nothing that should have concerned a man like Daniel. But Clara had other ideas. "You're ready," she said simply. Panic clawed at his throat. Performing? In front of people? Even if it was just Madame Laurent's other students, the risk was unimaginable. But the thought of refusing, of never knowing what it felt like to truly dance, was worse. The night of the recital, Daniel stood backstage, his heart hammering. He wore a white tutu, his legs sheathed in shimmering tights, his face carefully made up. Clara had helped him with everything, her hands steady as she pinned his hair back, her smile approving as she stepped back to admire her work. "You look perfect," she said. The music began. For the first time in his life, Daniel Whitmore stepped into the light not as a businessman, not as a titan of industry, but as Danielle, graceful, radiant, free. And as he danced, he realized he never wanted to stop. The music carried Danielle across the stage like a breeze lifting a fallen petal, effortless, inevitable. Every plie, every pirouette, every delicate extension of her leg was an act of surrender, as if her body had always known how to move this way and was only now being allowed to show it. The audience, small, intimate, just Madame Lauren's other students and a few close friends, watched in silence, their expressions shifting from curiosity to awe. She had spent months terrified of this moment, certain that she would be exposed as an imposter, that someone would recognize the sharp-jawed corporate predator beneath the layers of tulle and tights. But as the final notes of the piece swelled and she struck her last pose, arms curved above her head, back arched, chest rising and falling with exertion, no one laughed. No one whispered. They simply applauded. Backstage, Clara embraced her, the older woman's grip firm. "I knew you had it in you," she murmured. Danielle's hands trembled as she peeled off her gloves. She had spent her entire life chasing power, dominance, control. Yet here, in this moment of vulnerability, she had never felt stronger. But reality was waiting. The next morning, Daniel Whitmore returned to his office, his suit immaculate, his tie knotted with military precision. His assistant handed him his schedule without a second glance. His colleagues greeted him with the usual deferential nods. No one suspected a thing. Yet something had shifted. He found himself distracted during meetings, his mind drifting to the memory of satin ribbons tied around his ankles, the weightlessness of a grand jeté. His body, once a tool for intimidation, broad shoulders, rigid posture, now felt like a costume. The more he tried to suppress Danielle, the more she demanded to be seen. Then came the invitation to the charity masquerade ball. It was the event of the season. High society's elite gathering under the guise of philanthropy, their identities concealed behind ornate masks. A perfect opportunity. Danielle's heart raced as she prepared. She chose an emerald green gown, its bodice embroidered with delicate silver vines, the skirt cascading in soft waves. Clara helped her with her makeup, smoky eyes, lips painted a deep rose, and arranged her hair in an elegant chignon. The final touch was the mask, a feathered half-face creation that left just enough mystery. "You'll be stunning," Clara assured her. And she was. The ballroom was a sea of glittering masks and whispered intrigue. No one looked twice at the tall, graceful woman in green, her movements too assured to be questioned. For the first time, Danielle moved through the world not as a shadow, but as herself. Then she saw him. Richard Kensington, her biggest rival in the boardroom, a man who had made it his mission to dismantle Daniel Whitmore's empire. He stood across the room, his mask doing little to hide his smug smirk as he schmoozed with investors. Panic clawed at her throat. If he recognized her, a waltz began. Before she could retreat, a gloved hand extended toward her. "May I have this dance?" The voice was smooth, unfamiliar. The man behind the mask had sharp blue eyes and an easy confidence. Danielle hesitated, then placed her hand in his. They moved together effortlessly, his lead firm but gentle. "You dance beautifully," he murmured. She should have been terrified. But the music, the anonymity, the sheer thrill of being seen, it all made her bold. "Thank you," she replied, her voice softer than Daniel's, but steadier than she expected. When the dance ended, he bowed. "I hope we meet again." She melted into the crowd before Richard could spot her, her pulse still racing. The next morning, Daniel Whitmore walked into the office, as if nothing had happened. But when an email popped up on his screen, an invitation to a private ballet performance, signed only with a single initial, he smiled. Danielle wasn't going back in the box. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to. The email burned in Daniel's mind all morning. That single initial, E, taunted him with possibilities. Was it the mysterious dancer from the masquerade? A trap set by Richard? Or worse, someone who knew his secret? His fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised to delete it, to bury Danielle once more beneath spreadsheets and conference calls. But then he remembered the way the stage lights had warmed his skin. The weightlessness of the dance. The freedom of being seen without being known. He hit reply. The performance was to be held at a private studio downtown, the kind of place that didn't advertise its existence. When Daniel arrived, dressed in his usual charcoal suit, though with a hint of lace beneath his shirt, he half expected to find an empty room, a cruel joke. Instead, the space was softly lit, the air thick with the scent of rosin and ambition. A handful of spectators sat on folding chairs, their faces obscured by shadows. And then he stepped into the light, the man from the masquerade. Up close, he was even more striking. Lean but powerful, his dancer's physique evident even beneath his fitted shirt. His mask was gone, revealing sharp cheekbones and a faint scar above his brow. He didn't smile, just extended a hand. "You came." Danielle's pulse fluttered. She should have been terrified. But for once, fear wasn't the loudest voice in her head. The music began, something haunting, modern. The man, Evan, as he introduced himself, moved with a controlled ferocity, his body a language Danielle understood instinctively. When he reached for her, she didn't hesitate. They danced without speaking. Evan's hands guided her, not as a teacher would, but as a partner. Equal. Desired. The choreography was unfamiliar, but her body remembered what her mind had forgotten: how to yield, how to trust. When the music ended, the small audience erupted in applause. Danielle's face burned, but Evan didn't let go of her hand. "You're wasted in that suit," he murmured. The words should have felt like a threat. Instead, they sounded like a promise. The next weeks passed in a blur. Daniel's days were still filled with board meetings and acquisitions, but his nights belonged to Evan. They rehearsed in secret, pushing Danielle's body to its limits. Evan was relentless, demanding perfection, but his touch was always gentle. "Again," he'd say when she stumbled. "Again," when she nailed the turn. And then, one evening, he didn't let her go home. Danielle stood in Evan's loft, her breath shallow as he circled her. The space was sparse, a bar along one wall, a mattress on the floor, a single vase of white lilies on the windowsill. Evan's fingers traced the line of her throat, down to the first button of her blouse. "You don't need this anymore." It wasn't a question. Danielle closed her eyes as the fabric slid away, replaced by silk. Evan dressed her slowly, reverently. A corset that nipped her waist, stockings that whispered against her skin. When he turned her toward the mirror, she barely recognized herself. The woman staring back was real. Evan's lips brushed her ear. "Now dance for me." And she did. The gala was Richard's idea, a fundraiser for the arts, with a twist. "We'll have professionals perform," he'd sneered in the boardroom, eyes locked on Daniel. "Unless you'd like to volunteer?" The room had laughed. Daniel had smiled. And now, standing backstage in a gossamer tutu, Danielle realized she'd never been more alive. The curtains parted. The crowd, filled with her colleagues, her rivals, Richard, gasped as she stepped into the spotlight. But Danielle didn't see them. She only saw Evan, waiting in the wings. And when the music began, she flew. The spotlight burned white-hot against Danielle's skin as she took her opening pose, the murmurs of the crowd fading into a stunned silence. She could feel hundreds of eyes dissecting her, the delicate arch of her foot in the satin point shoe, the way the tutu flared just above her thighs, the unmistakable strength in her movements that no amount of lace could disguise. Somewhere in that sea of black-tie pretension, Richard Kensington was gaping, his drink frozen halfway to his lips. But none of that mattered. The opening notes of Swan Lake swelled through the grand ballroom, and Danielle surrendered to the music. Every plie, every fouette, every impossibly graceful extension of her leg was a rebellion. The rigid corporate world that had forged Danielle Whitmore had no language for this, for the way her body curved through space, for the raw femininity she wore as effortlessly as her pearls. Evan had choreographed this moment perfectly. As she spun into the coda, Danielle caught flashes of recognition in the audience, a board member's eyebrows shooting upward, an investor's wife leaning forward with sudden interest. But the most delicious moment came when she locked eyes with Richard. His face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally, horrified realization. "Danielle Whitmore?" His mouth formed the words soundlessly. Danielle answered with a perfect arabesque. The music crescendoed, and Evan joined her on stage, his powerful frame a striking contrast to her ethereal grace. Their pas de deux was electric, a conversation of touches and glances that told the whole story without words. When he lifted her high above his head, the audience erupted in applause. But the true victory came after the final bow. Backstage was chaos. Reporters clamored for interviews. Socialites pretended they'd always admire Danielle's artistry, and Richard Kensington was conspicuously absent, last seen storming toward the valet with his tail between his legs. Danielle barely registered any of it. Evan pulled her into a private dressing room, his hands trembling against her waist. "You are magnificent." She laughed, giddy with adrenaline. "I think I just ended my career." "No," he cupped her face, his thumbs smearing her rouge. "You just started a new one." And just like that, the fear dissolved. Daniel Whitmore had spent his life building an empire out of steel and spreadsheets. But Danielle? She was made of softer things, satin and ambition, nerve and endpoint. The headlines the next morning were predictably sensational. Tycoon traded ties for tutus in stunning ballet debut. Daniel Whitmore's secret life as a ballerina shocks high society. Kensington capital stock plummets after CEO's public humiliation. Danielle read them over breakfast in Evan's loft, her toes still aching from the performance. The world was buzzing, but for the first time in years, she felt perfectly still. "What now?" Evan asked, sliding a coffee toward her. She took a slow sip, savoring the bitterness. "Now," she said, "I dance." 1 year later, the marquee outside the Metropolitan Opera House glittered under the evening lights. Danielle Whitmore and Evan Marchand, principal dancers. "Tonight, Giselle." Inside, Danielle adjusted her tulle skirt in the mirror. Her reflection was unfamiliar in the best way, softer, happier, truer. The scars of her old life were still there. The boardroom had left its marks, but they no longer defined her. A knock at the door. "5 minutes, Ms. Whitmore." She took a deep breath. Out there, thousands of people waited to see her. Not the ghost of a businessman in a ballerina's costume, but the woman she'd always been. Evan appeared in the doorway, already in costume, his eyes bright. "Ready." Danielle smiled. And when the curtain rose, she danced. Thank you so much for watching till now. It means the world to have you here. This community is all about empowering each other and celebrating the incredible journeys of everyone on their path to living authentically. If you're ever feeling lost or alone, remember you have a whole family here for you. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and let's keep inspiring each other, sending you all the love and strength in the world. Until next time, live your life by your rules.